The ASUS ROG Zephyrus G14, a true desktop replacement in 2020. Let's take a look. All right, so in this video, we're not going to go through necessarily like a full deep dive into the technical aspects of the G14. Those videos are out there, and I encourage you to go look at them if you're interested in this computer. This is more a look at the G14 as a potential desktop replacement and sort of my thoughts as we kind of go through it. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to look at the pros to it being a desktop replacement, some of the cons, maybe some of the workarounds. Then we're going to look at benchmarks, kind of both gaming and production, and then sort of wrap it up with my thoughts. So that's going to be the tempo of the video, just like most of my videos. So without further ado, let's get into these specs here. So just on the surface level here, the G14 is a 14-inch laptop, and it houses the Ryzen 9 4900HS, which is a 35-watt, 8-core, 16-thread Zen 2 architecture AMD CPU. So just starting there, it's a beast. It is a behemoth of a laptop mobile process, not mobile processor, but laptop processor. I mean, 8 cores, and we'll see it when we get into some of these benchmarks. I think it's listed at 3 gigahertz base speed with a 4.3 gigahertz boost speed, which, you know, if anybody's looked into actual comparisons like AMD to Intel, those sorts of things, you know, you'll know that Intel is sort of the king of speed when it comes to CPUs. And that's the same for the laptop, you know, mobile CPU lineup, where their Intel 10th generation CPUs will clock up to 5 gigahertz in very specific instances. But again, if you've looked at those sort of CPUs and processors between AMD and Intel, you'll know that clock speed doesn't tell the whole story. You know, on the desktop side of the house, when you look at the Ryzen 3000 series of processors in comparison to the Intel, they run slower, you know, in that lower 4 gigahertz range, unless you get into like the 3950X and those sorts of things. But it's the same story with the Intel, or the mobile side of the house here with the 4900HS. You know, what AMD, and this is a true marvel with modern technology and really an appreciation of all that AMD's brought to us, because they've really taken sort of the DIY computer enthusiast sort of space and just exploded it over the last few years. You know, where Intel was kind of stuck on that quad core processor in the desktop side of the house and stuff for years and years, AMD came on the scene and immediately things changed, and they're still pushing the envelope. And as far as the laptop lineup of processors, AMD's the king right now, and this Ryzen 9 4900HS is case in point of that. I don't know if this thing's going away, but yeah, so 4.4 or 4.3 gigahertz is what it says. You'll see in some of these benchmarks, I hit nearly 4.4 just when you're kind of doing simple daily tasks. So from a CPU sort of production side of the house, it's essentially a full-fledged 8-core, 16-thread CPU. I mean, there are no limitations here. And what's amazing is it's a 35-watt CPU. So when we get into some of these benchmarks that we'll see here, I mean, it easily takes out, not easily, I shouldn't say that, but it outperforms, you know, similar spec desktop processors, which is amazing considering it is sitting inside of this I mean, this thing is every bit of, and not every bit, messing up my words here, but it is, you can essentially assume this is an ultra, light, ultra portable notebook, essentially 14 inches. I'm not sure the exact specs with the height and everything and weight, but it's minuscule and it's amazing. So on the processor side of the house, if you need processing power for your desktop, which I'm a fan of, anybody that's watched this channel for a little bit, and if you haven't watched this channel, I encourage you go like this video first off, and then subscribe to the channel and go check out some of my other videos. I think CPU is where you should focus your attention at when you're building a computer or you're picking out a computer. It doesn't matter. I think, the CPU is the brains of the computer, and I want all the brains I can get. God did not bless me in this life, so I'm going to take advantage in the computer that I have. But yeah, so I mean, it's every bit of a full-fledged desktop processor, essentially. And then moving into the other side of it with the graphics card, so it does have dedicated graphics. This is the RTX 2060 Max-Q model. It does also, I believe, come with there's a 1660 model out there. And the 2060 Max-Q, it's not a full-fledged RTX 2060, but it games well, and you'll see some of the gaming benchmarks in there. But it is restricted, I believe, to 65 watts, I think, is the power limit restriction on the RTX 2060, which is what limits some of that performance. But it's kind of necessary when you are packing as much performance in such a small laptop like this. If you were going to have, like a full-fledged, 4900H and RTX 2060, this thing runs hot, and you'll see that. We'll talk about it. If you had those full-fledged components in there, it'd probably be unusable. So with the power restrictions, both in the HS CPU and then the Max-Q version of the GPU, it's able to, still perform even though it does get hot. So those are the main specifics with the laptop. And then also it does have, I got the 16 gig. I think it only comes 8 gigs. I don't know. But this is the 16 gigabyte version with the RAM. And then this also has the 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. And that's another benefit to this laptop in particular, and more specifically the Ryzen 4000 series of processors, is they are able to run 3200 megahertz RAM, which is nice. Faster RAM means a faster computer. So it's not going to be night and day. It's not going to change your life if you go from 2666 to 3200, but it's nice to know that you're getting that extra bump in performance along with the Zen 2 processor and all that. So, and then the 1 terabyte NVMe, I believe, and this one is an Intel 660p, which if you can see my shelf back here, I'm very familiar with. I love the Intel 660p. It used to be the best value on the market as far as storage, and it still performs well today. But, that's an upgrade path down the road. So some of the pros I've probably already touched on here with this laptop, but we'll just retouch on them here now. So the main pro is the processor. It's amazing, truly amazing what this processor is capable of. Like I said, it's, in my opinion, it's every bit of a desktop processor, compared to what we've seen before. So with that being said, I think I'll just jump into the benchmarks here instead, and then kind of talk through this rather than talking now and then showing the benchmarks. So let's go ahead, jump into these benchmarks, and then continue on with the video. All right, so jumping in here now, and you can kind of hear these fans spinning up here. I'm out in my garage studio here, and it's getting warm, so it's running a little bit hot. But we'll jump here first into Cinebench. So ran this a couple of times just in performance mode. So it does have a turbo mode, but this is just performance mode, and you can see here 4,153 points. And you can even see it shows right here, beats the Ryzen 7 1700X, which is a full-fledged desktop first gen Ryzen CPU, which is impressive. But then when you come over here, look at the Intel. So you take a look at the Intel scores on Cinebench, and you can see down here it beats an i7 8700K in this multi-threaded score. It beats the 9700K, which again are full-fledged Intel CPUs. I mean, it doesn't beat the 9900K, but it's not necessarily getting trounced either. And keep in mind, that's a 8-core, 16-thread Intel flagship desktop processor. So impressive results in the multi-threaded scores. And then you come and take a look at the Ryzen CPUs, and it beats the Ryzen 7 2700X. Again, Zen Plus, I believe, is what that's considered. And if anybody that's owned a 2700X, I've owned it. It's a magnificent CPU. If you can find a good deal on it, I still recommend it. But to think that this 35-watt mobile laptop processor beats it by 200 points is impressive. And again, it puts it in that ballpark of a 3700X for multi-threaded scores. So a powerhouse of a CPU packed inside this little laptop. And then you come and take a look at the single-threaded scores, 487. So you can see right down here, it's beating a stock i7 7700K, which is impressive. But then you come and take a look again. We'll start with the Ryzen. That's beating or basically matching a 3600X, matching a 3700X in single-threaded performance. So again, amazing results from this Ryzen 4000 laptop CPU. And then again, take a look down here. Beats the 8700K in single-threaded performance. Beats the 9700K in single-threaded performance. So just absolutely astounding. And again, it's on par roughly with the 9900K in single-threaded performance. So those again are full-fledged desktop processors. That is, in my opinion, amazing results from this. So if you're looking for CPU intensive workloads, yeah, it's going to be hard to find something better than this CPU. So that's the Cinebench scores. Let's take a look at a few more. So then next up here, we got the Geekbench 5 benchmark. So I'm not too familiar with Geekbench, but if you guys are into Geekbench, these are just the scores that this thing pulled off. And I didn't run this a whole bunch of times, just kind of ran it through once. Again, I don't use Geekbench a ton, but I just wanted to give you guys something else to look at. So if you are into the Geekbench benchmark, here you go. Single core performance of 1178. Then we got multi-core performance of 7727. And then here you go. You can see the overall scores that we got running the CUDA performance. So again, if you're into that and these mean something to you, go ahead and take a look. And then next up, we'll jump into the user benchmark. This one I'm a little more familiar with. So you can see here, just running through this again, Ryzen 9, desktop 123%, workstation 107%. So performs wonderfully as you would expect. Gaming, and we'll get into that a little bit later, 73%. So not great, but not terrible either. So then next up, we'll run through V-Ray. Again, I'm not a huge V-Ray or 3D, rendering benchmark user, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys if that's something you're into, how this would perform for you, filling that role of a desktop, maybe workstation. So there's the scores. And then here I just pulled up some references because, again, I don't use V-Ray a ton. But that score of, what do we have? 10,756. So coming down here, there we are, the Ryzen 9 4900HS. And just this is sort of its class. So you can see it's close to the 8700, not terribly far behind a 3600X. And again, those are full-fledged desktop CPUs. All these are. So that's how that stacks up. Again, I'm not a V-Ray user necessarily, so you guys will have to take that with a grain of salt. And then here's the GPU performance in V-Ray, 219. So again, that puts it basically on par with a 9700K using a GTX 1070. So I think that's good company to keep. Again, when you're talking about a mobile 35 watt processor and a 65 watt, GPU, I think that's pretty good. So let me know in the comments if it's not good, because again, I'm not a terribly big V-Ray user. But last one up here is I just wanted to show you guys some video rendering that I did. So I typically use Filmora 9. That's what I'm making this video in. That's the video editor that I like to use. So I just wanted to show you guys kind of quickly what sort of performance this had in Filmora 9. So the way I made this video in Filmora 9 is I just took some Heaven benchmarks, which I'll get into here in a minute. And I took two benchmarks together, slapped them, together. So I had some audio, some video. I put two videos in, so it's got video in video. And then I threw a couple transitions in there just so I had some work to run through. And ran it, and you can see over here on the side, Filmora doesn't utilize a ton of CPU, so it's at 16%, maxing out that GPU at 96%. And you can see down here 150. I took a little snip of it, and it wound up finishing a 10-minute video render in about 2 minutes and 10 seconds using Filmora 9. So again, if you're into video editing, maybe you got a YouTube channel, whatever it happens to be, if this is something that you'd be considering, you can see down there it's running right now 3.7 gigahertz, bouncing all around. And then I made the same video in Premiere Pro, and this is the results from Premiere Pro. So I think this one wound up finishing exactly at 4 minutes and 36 seconds. So definitely slower than the Filmora, but use a lot more CPU, about the same GPU down there. And you can see, again, running about 3.9 gigahertz this time. So that's sort of, I didn't want to use like Puget Systems and some of those like synthetic benchmarks. This is just real world benchmarks of videos that I was throwing together on here so you guys could see what that performance looked like. right, so then that's all the benchmarks. So last thing, just to wrap this up, there are some limitations when it comes to this computer. So obviously, looking at some of those video game benchmarks and stuff, you could see that the temps were getting pretty high, touched into the 90s more than once. So that is a limitation. And also the I/O can be a limitation. It comes with 2 USB type A connectors, 2 USB type C connectors. One has a display port out, so you can connect DisplayPort, which if you saw the setup that I had earlier in the video with my 2 monitors, one of those is set up using DisplayPort through the USB-C, and then it also has a full-size HDMI port. So the other monitor in that setup is set up through the HDMI port. So the I/O can be, it's not the most robust I/O on the planet, but it's fine. And so that can be a limitation. The temperatures can be a limitation because it's such a powerful computer packed into such a small, ultra portable sort of case here. So the way that I sort of worked my way around that is, as you can see it sitting here, it has a laptop cooler, and this isn't anything fancy. It's just like a $35 laptop cooler from Office Depot, but it helps keep the temperatures a little bit down. And then what I'm also going to do, which I have the parts that just came in, so I probably will make a video about this as well, but I'm going to be opening this thing up and then replacing the thermal paste with Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. And then I also have some thermal pads that I may look to see if I can throw on anywhere in here to help alleviate some of that heat. So hopefully with the laptop cooler and the Cryonaut, maybe bring those temps down a couple degrees. It's not thermal throttling or anything like that, but it's hotter than I would like. So see if I can bring those down a little bit. And then the last one, to correct the I/O problem, you can just go and get something like this. I bought it for $10 at, again, Office Max, and it has 4 USB type A connectors with a USB type C, male to female part here. So, You can just connect this in. Now you got 4 additional USB type A ports. So if you saw that in the video, this was hooked up. So this way, I mean, you can have up to 8 USB type A connectors. So using just those 2 simple tools cost me about 45 bucks. You know, keeps this thing running cool, relatively quiet, gives me all the IO that I need. So all in all, I mean, it's getting harder to justify, you know, a massive desktop when you can start picking up things that are this small and this powerful, and you have the benefit of an included keyboard, which is wonderful on this computer, an included monitor, which is, I have the 120 hertz 1080p monitor, which is wonderful. Very nice color accuracy. It's not the most color accurate, so, but it's good. 100% sRGB coverage, I think. So who I think this is for, if you're like me and you have maybe a small YouTube channel hoping to get bigger, please like and subscribe. Or, you know, you're starting to get into video editing, you're starting to figure out 3D modeling, or maybe you do it as a hobby, or you're going through school, something like that. I would highly recommend this. If you know, like me, I game a little bit, but it's not sort of my primary focus. So while this thing isn't pumping out the highest FPS on the planet, 60 to 100 FPS is plenty for me. I don't game competitively. I'm not like an FPS player, so not a big concern for me. So who it's not for is if gaming is your number one concern. If gaming is your number one concern, there's better laptops on the market than this. I think even the response time in this is somewhere like 40 milliseconds. So if you're maybe playing like Valorant, or I don't know how I said that right, CSGO, Overwatch, may not be the best for you if you are hyper competitive in those kind of games. If you're just casual and you like playing Overwatch because it's fun and colorful, then this is probably fine for you. But if you're competitive and every millisecond counts, this is not the laptop for you. So those are kind of the 2 use cases there. But all in all, for $1,400, I actually got this open box for $1,350 at Best Buy. So I saved myself a little bit of money. $1,400 for all of this in such a small portable package, I think is a home run. And, you know, if you're in the market trying to decide between laptop, desktop, it's hard to justify, in my opinion, going with a big, bulky desktop when you can get something like this that you can just pick up and go and accomplish a lot of what you need to accomplish. So all in all, AMD hit a home run. ASUS hit a home run. This computer is fabulous. I highly recommend it if, you know, you can swing the budget. It's well worth it, I think. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, please like and subscribe. Leave comments. I love hearing from you guys. And that's all I got for today. God bless.